Fusion GPS allegedly working with a British intelligence officer with the Kremlin officials to cook up the dirty dossier on Trump. So how exactly did it all happen, and how credible at all is this dossier? Daniel Hoffman is a retired CIA station chief who served in Moscow for 5 years. He's also the vice president of security at SPG, and he joins us now with more on this. Daniel, you would know about this, having served in Moscow and having worked with Russian officials. Talk to us about this dossier. What kind of intelligence work was really done here?
I think I've worked more against Russian officials than I have with them, to be frank. But really, there's three concerns about the dossier. The first are the sources. We don't know anything about the sources. We don't know who they are. We don't know about the veracity of their reporting record. Presumably, Mr. Steele used these sources before he used them to collect the information that wound up in the dossier, and perhaps he's even still using them. But usually we make analytical judgments based on how strong we feel the reporting is, and we just don't know a lot about that.
Do we know that they were paid to those reports? Potentially these Russian officials were paid for this information.
It's certainly quite possible. It would certainly be standard practice that Mr. Steele would pay his sources. Second concern is the tradecraft that they used to obtain the information. Mr. Steele himself did not travel to Moscow. He used these sources, who presumably spoke with others in Russia. And the FSB is one of the best, most effective...
The FSB, for our viewers, is
the Russian internal service, their internal police. And they're very effective at running intelligence and counterintelligence operations. I think it's quite likely they would have discovered that this intelligence collection was going on. Remember that they had hacked into the Democratic National Committee server, and they might have also obtained information through that means that this collection was going on.
Would they have known who ultimately was benefiting from this? If they're giving information about then-candidate Trump, do they know who they're working for?
I think presumably they would have tracked that acquisition all the way back from the sources to Mr. Steele, to Fusion GPS, and potentially to the candidate. And
really?
so potentially they could have known and then use this channel, as they've used our social networking and media sites, for disinformation, which is an old Russian and Soviet tactic to spread disinformation to achieve their political aims.
Do you think this is ultimately for Russia more about interfering in the integrity of our process, or about particular candidates?
I think the jury's out on that, frankly. For sure, I believe it's designed to interfere in the integrity of the process and soil our democratic institutions. But let's see where the facts lead us. There's also questions about Mr. Steele himself. Who in Fusion GPS chose to hire him, and why? Who suggested it? Was it someone in the private sector? Was it a government or former government official? We don't know that either.
If indeed this this federal investigation led by Robert Mueller was largely triggered by, or triggered in part by, this dossier, how troubling is that to you, that an entire federal investigation would be premised on a document like this?
It's troubling in a lot of respects, not the least of which we have a retired British MI6 officer who was involved in obtaining information on behalf of one campaign against another candidate. That, at the very least, is unseemly, if not risking some sort of political blowback. I would never imagine myself collecting information on the Tories for Labour. It's just odd. And to the extent to which that played a role in the investigation and the intensity of the investigation, I mean, there are great concerns. I'd like to see if the special counsel would ask our intelligence community to take a hard look at the dossier and see whether any of that information, if any of it, could be corroborated.
Yeah, almost none of it has been. So,
true.
Daniel, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. You know of what you speak, so we love hearing from you.